So glad to have you joining us for episode, 104 of Curiosity, Not Judgment. Welcome. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
I want to talk today about self-preservation. And immediately some images come to mind for me. One being the instructions that you're given when you go through the kind of roll call as you board a plane, and they go through all of the seatbelt safety instructions and always talk about the mask, that if the plane becomes depressurized, the mask will come down, and you take care of yourself first before you take care of your child. And in that case, because you need to have oxygen, you need to be clear-headed, you need to be able to make coherent decisions. And then I also think about in swimming safety, if you see somebody who is flailing in a pool or in a body of water, you don't jump in and try to save them with your person, because chances are that they will pull you down. You take care of yourself first, you extend a line, you extend a life preserver, and then you pull them in. And so in those cases, self-preservation makes a whole lot of sense. But in our day-to-day actions and interactions with people, is self-preservation the way to posture yourself and the way to live?
The purpose of that self-preservation, it actually sounds selfish at first. Put your mask on first. Don't jump in the water. Like you're trying to save yourself or putting your needs above the other person. But what, in that case, what it really is and what the motivation is that you can't help anybody if you're incapacitated. And you can't be of help to anyone else. When I ran a home care business with a bunch of 200 caregivers, we would say, you have to take care of yourself first before you can take care of others. Make sure you don't get burned out. Watch for burnout. Watch for, and it's like breathing. You have to breathe in to be able to breathe out, right? And so while that sounds initially selfish, it certainly is not, because it enables you and gives you the capacity to serve others. But self-preservation, when it goes beyond that, when you're in a meeting and somebody says something clever or really good in front of the boss, and you're going, I can't stand that guy. And it's because that person is more successful than you in your perception at the moment. That's a different kind of self-preservation.
So I've been reflecting on competition. This has been a theme that's kind of come up in my sphere over the last years, honestly, but with increasing intensity the last couple of weeks. And especially as it pertains to the nonprofit space, which is where I'm employed, that notion of competition is a real frustration to me, because ultimately the needs are never going to be met. And they're certainly not going to be met by one organization.
Or one person within
one person, correct. And so if you're looking at housing, for example, if you were to have one entity only serving the housing crisis, they would fall further and further and further behind. The fact that there's 4 or 5 different agencies that are dealing with housing and housing vouchers is to the benefit of the community. And yet, why do we, and I'm not saying there's been a specific issue with this particular realm, but in general, when we have others that are in that same field, why do we view them as a threat, or why do we view them as competition when we're ultimately both working towards the same goal?
Yeah, I think some of it is not evil. It's more natural. It's just that we have to kind of watch it, is that we get so used to trying to promote and protect the thing that we're doing, that if somebody else is doing it, well, then we want to make sure that people know that we're doing it better, so that any funds, any resources, any accolades come to us to preserve us as individuals and our organizations more than someone else's. And, and it comes from a scarcity mentality. It comes from, there's only one pie, and if I have a smaller piece of a pie, then by definition you have a larger piece of a pie. And instead of growing the pie together to be able to serve more folks in needs of homes. And then it doesn't take into account the niche part of that either. There may be, if there's 4 organizations, let's say that is the number, in Albuquerque, New Mexico, or in any given city, hopefully some are serving veterans and some are serving,
specific parts of the population.
Specific parts of the population, and no one is going to be able to do all of it. to your point. And so, but it's a little idealistic to think that everybody's just going to collaborate at any time. And within an organization, then I want my position, even if it's not title or salary, just influence. I get concerned about my influence on an organization. Am I being listened to? And if I'm more successful, I'll be listened to more. And therefore, I want to be more successful than you so that I have greater influence. Ironically, that can sometimes lead to less influence because people will say, well, that guy's always competing and he's not collaborating and he's trying to hoard the glory. And so, we shy away from that person. And then you hurt your relationships, which ultimately hurts it. But it depends on the organization. There are many organizations where that kind of behavior is rewarded.
Yeah, that's true. It makes me want to ask the 5 why questions we had talked about a few episodes back, like layers of why. So if the statement is something like, I need to stand my ground, I need to stand up for myself, for my organization.
Why?
Well, because our funding is dependent on us being seen by the city government and acknowledging our work.
Why?
Well, that's the funding model that we've chosen.
Why?
Seemed like the path of least resistance.
Least resistance. Is that your value?
No, I don't know. This isn't really a,
I know.
a situation I'm facing, but it does make me want to, kind of unravel that for myself when I get into some of these situations. And what you say is valid and right and true, that all of us really struggle to be noticed. We struggle to make a difference. We struggle to have value. And if we were to ask ourselves those 5 whys, when it gets down to the bottom why, I think we just want to matter. We want to make a difference and we want to be known, loved, and accepted. And so that notion of self-preservation, I think, is really wrapped up in those things.
But it can hurt the very relationships that are going to help you gain that influence. And I think that's the key. And we all kind of get a tinge of defensiveness when someone either calls us out or is doing better than we are in our own perception. And I keep saying perception because that's a large part of it. But, it's a natural reaction. Speaking of self-preservation, just yesterday I was at a brunch and we were ordering, and I ordered a cup of coffee. And somebody who I hadn't seen and sat down to a meal with for years says, hey, wait a minute, you gave up coffee as I was listening to your podcast. And I said, oh, that's good you're listening.
That's so funny.
I said, but, I allow myself a cheat day on Sundays. We go after church to this brunch, and so it's a French place, it's really good coffee. And so I'm okay, I do 1 coffee a week. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say that I was absolutely, I'm now on a day-to-day basis, I've followed through and I don't drink coffee anymore. But now I can enjoy 1 cup of coffee, right? But it was so funny because he looked at, and I got defensive. It's like, oh, wait a minute, like you're calling me out, right? And of course, but I didn't need to be.
Yeah.
Especially in that situation. He doesn't really care whether I'm doing that or not. He doesn't think I'm a hypocrite. He doesn't think anything like that. He was looking for an explanation as to what's going on. I thought you weren't doing that. But we had a good laugh over it. But we get a little defensive, and we think about that kind of stuff. In Giant Worldwide, they have a series of 3 questions that you ask, and it says, what am I trying to hide? What am I trying to, or what am I afraid of losing? What am I trying to hide? And what am I trying to prove, and to whom? And I think that trying to prove to people I have integrity in that situation, right? Or trying to hide, oh my goodness, I shouldn't be having coffee in public now that I said it on a podcast, that, or what am I afraid of losing? I'm afraid of losing credibility or whatever. Those kinds of things are kind of, they're in us, aren't they? They kind of pop out even when we don't want them to. And if we were to really think about it, we would say, oh, it's nothing. This is me. This is who I am. I'm allowed to have 1 cup of coffee a week now. That's a great improvement from what I was doing, and it's okay. But we get a little bit defensive, and I think that leads to that, and that hurts. That can hurt relationship. If I'd have gotten very defensive, it's none of your business, and what are you doing, calling me out for something? I mean, that would not have been helpful in the situation.
No. But isn't it interesting that your self-preservation kicked in that fast with somebody that you're not,
No.
who doesn't threaten you, you're not in
Exactly.
competition with, and
Right.
it still kicks on.
Still kicks in.
And so there is that kind of defense mechanism within us that, again, I think as we ask those whys, those varying levels of whys and get drilled down, we want to be loved, we want to be accepted, we want to be valued. And so if there is a perception that something is going to interfere with any of those, I think that self-preservation technique kicks into high gear, because I think instinctively, like, wait, is there danger afoot of me losing love in the eyes of this person, or losing trust or value in the eyes of this person? And it's fascinating to me how fast our brains work subconsciously to kick into high gear with self-preservation.
So this is where some great thought leaders have brought forth the idea of pausing when agitated, pausing when defensive, pausing when, instead of just having that initial reaction. And that is, as we've talked about before, what separates us from the animals. Animals, they just respond on instinct, and they respond on learned experiences. And we, as human beings, have the capacity to change our behavior based on our values each and every moment, each and every situation, if we will pause and think about what the right response is according to our values. Because this self-preservation thing is an example of something that's in us, but it doesn't have to be huge, and it doesn't have to be loud. It can be in us. We can get, angry at an injustice, but how do we act on that anger? We can get defensive for a moment. How do we act on that defensiveness? And I think that's the key question to ask is, okay, given this, how do I respond?
Yeah. I love those 3 questions you brought up from Giant Worldwide, and they mirror pretty closely some questions I got asked just today. A phrase from somebody that was, I'm going to not directly quote it, but something in the lines of, live in such a way that you have nothing to lose, nothing to prove, and nothing to gain. And, I've seen the motivational posters like, live like you have nothing to lose, go hike the Andes, go jump out of an airplane, whatever. And, it's the tough guy posters, right? I get that. There is an element where if fear holds us back from living our best, fullest life, then we don't want that. We want to live like we have nothing to lose. So I'll give that one some allowance. But the one that really made me pause was live like you have nothing to gain. And that is so counter to everything I think that we are taught in American culture and consumerism and business and ethics. It's, the one who works the hardest and sacrifices the most gets to the top and has the most to show for it. And if we collectively were to live like we had nothing to gain, my goodness, would that be a different community?
Yeah, and it's interesting, when you first said nothing to gain, I thought, well, wait a minute, I want to gain a roof over my head, I want to gain food for the day, I want to gain, those things. But, and again, it's one of those things where a little bit is okay, a lot is not, right? So it's okay to have a little bit to say, hey, I want to get at least a stable month-to-month, life. But then how much farther do I need to go than that, right? And so when you say gain, and there's a lot of wisdom is in the definition of words, but, when you say nothing to gain, that means I have everything I need now?
I think so. And, having heard this just today, I haven't had a whole lot of time to contemplate it. But if I think about life as a series of transactions, and so for example, my sister texted me on my way over here, did I want to go to a line dancing class tonight? So if I ask it through the lens of what can I gain? Well, probably not a whole lot, right? I'm not gonna gain popularity. I'm not going to gain, some great physique. I'm not going to gain status. It would just be, going to a community center and bumbling around for an hour pretending to know what to do. But do we always have to have something to gain?
That's a good one. And one could argue you gain a better relationship with your sister if you go. But I take the point. Don't just do things. There was a very famous author who wrote a book recently, and I don't want to disparage this author now, but I just had a visceral response. This author said, if you really want to succeed in life, there's things you just don't do. And he had a list of them, and one of them was help your friends move. Like,
really?
You should pay someone to do that, or they should pay someone to do that, or don't waste your time on that. And the title of the book is 4-Hour Workweek. And anyway, this guy he's so efficient and productive with every minute of his life that he had a list of, and I just had a strong reaction to that, like.
And then you called me to help your sister move.
Exactly, and we just did that on Saturday.
Yeah, literally.
So that's what brought it up.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that. It's like, so when you say act as if you have nothing to gain, I didn't gain anything out of helping my sister move on Saturday.
No.
I didn't gain anything by going and buying a bunch of breakfast burritos for people and inviting people at the last minute to come help, but it was the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. It was a good thing to do, and I didn't do it because it was a good thing to do. I was going to make myself feel good, but I did do that as if there was nothing to gain. I guess I take the point. It's a good one. I'll have to think some more about that one.
Well, and it flies in the face of self-preservation, right? Because self-preservation would say you have to gain something from your transactions. You have to prove something.
Net positive out of it, at least.
Yeah. And so in this case, you're out money for buying burritos. You're out time for helping. You're potentially out with some back injury if you lift something incorrectly, right? In the view of what do I have to gain? Not much. But to your point, it's relationship enhancing. You're showing up for the people that you love. You're inviting other people in your life that are important to you to be part of an opportunity to serve. And I think it's a net gain for everybody, but not in the way that you might initially think.
I'm actually liking this more and more because I take the point. I didn't do it to gain anything, but there's going to be a lot of gain out of it because now I've got a truck coming to take much needed stuff to international students tomorrow because she had an extra card table and a tea service and an old printer that still works. She just didn't want to go buy more cartridges for it, right? And so, I can fix these things up. And I went around the house and found a couple more things I didn't need. Now there's a truck tomorrow that's going to bring some much needed things to some international students that live in dorms and apartments and can't carry furniture with them from wherever they're coming from. And so there's that gain also that occurs in the world. So the world gains, I don't. There's more. There is something to this. I like this actually a lot.
Well, so then would you argue that self-preservation and self-sacrifice are opposites? Interesting.
If done well, I mean, this is the problem. You can always make an argument that doesn't fit, but I think in general, yes. I think that self-sacrifice that comes from humility, an often misused word, that comes from a thinking of others, is always a good thing. I mean, anytime we can get out of our own head, it's good for your own mental health, if nothing else. Just start there, to think of others and to do things knowing that you will gain nothing out of it. The more I think of it, the more I'm thinking, there's those whole secret Santas and people who go around leaving things on doorsteps at Christmas and just handing out food to the homeless and just making up a bunch of packages and sending it out. I don't gain anything from that. But that selfless act or that act of humility or that act of thinking of others other than myself absolutely helps from a mental health standpoint, if nothing else. Because if I get in my own head and I just sit in there with those 3,000 voices, listening to myself and channeling down a wrong way, that's never good.
Yeah. This all ties into, I think, a lot of the things that are really fueling our community, our culture, which is, self-promotion and making sure people know about who you are, what you do, what you stand for, and how you serve. And so I always am a little bit hesitant with charitable acts, whether it be financial or service in a particular arena that gets broadcast by way of social media. I so understand that we don't know what we don't know. And so I don't know that there's an opportunity to serve at the whatever All Saints Soup Kitchen a week from Thursday unless I see your post.
That's right. That's right.
I understand that, but I also know that there is in our self-preservation default, and because we want people to think highly of us, there is a tendency to want to broadcast our good deeds.
No, and I was going to call my dad yesterday to tell him that we got Sue moved, and I actually thought about that. Am I calling him because I want him to know I did this great thing for the family, or am I calling him because he needs to know, because he does he's interacting with my sister on this for a variety of reasons, and so I ultimately did call him. We talked about other things, and then I just offhandedly made a comment. But it's back to the motivation. Am I doing it because I want the world to know what a great person I am, or am I doing it because it needs to be done? And if other people find out, and or I can promote it so other people get involved, well, that's a different story. And so this is very interesting. But I think that if you say that self-preservation is probably not good, and by and large it probably is not, when it's writ large. If it's putting your mask on first, or throwing a lifeline versus jumping in, that's
being your
one
own
thing.
best medical advocate, I would say add that to the list.
Exactly. But if it goes beyond that into situations where you are out to gain or to beat others or to be in competition versus collaboration, especially when you're all in an organization trying to do the same thing, that is wrong. And if we're thinking, but at any time we're thinking of others and doing more of the self-sacrificing or the humility, or the other words I'm looking for but I can't get right now, that's good. And I think in life we can tend towards one or the other. We don't have to be perfect. We don't have to say, okay, I'm always going to be self-sacrificing from now on. I'm only going to think of others. I'm never going to think of myself. That doesn't do any good either. But if we can tend toward that, especially since I usually tend towards thinking about myself a lot, then that might be a good thing to think about. What can we do to think more about others, to think less about self-preservation and more about others' preservation as we go through our lives?
I think those are some fantastic, curious questions. And then just to bring back those that we mentioned earlier, as you're approaching a situation and feeling that need for self-preservation, to ask yourself, am I trying to prove something? Am I fighting against losing something? Or am I going to be okay if I have nothing to gain from this experience? And to really contemplate what that looks like moving forward in that realm. So really good questions today, and I know I'm going to continue to think on this for weeks to come.
Yeah, do that, and write a comment in the show notes about that, or find me at brunch and talk
Call
to
you
me
out for the
about
coffee
it.
drinking.
That's right.
All right. Well, as always, appreciate you joining us. So please do leave us a note if you've got something, curiosity.judgement.com, or on the YouTube channel, wherever you want to leave us a message, and then we'll catch up with you next week.
Take care.